fixed versus variable GOP. So to illustrate the difference between a fixed and a variable GOP, let's put some content in our frames. Right, so here we have two scenes, scene number 1 with the glass and scene number 2 with the woman watching the landscape. So here what do we see? We see that we have a scene change. So a scene change is when you have a shot of a camera and then you have another shot with no correlation between the two. The two shots are totally different. There is no possible temporal redundancy between them, and if there is any, it's statistically random. So now let's put some functions on this frame, so the I, B, 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 P, and so on and so on. And let's say we insert an iframe at every fixed interval. So now we talk about fixed GOP. So since we put iframes as fixed interval, we're going to place, let's say, a B frame at the last frame of the scene 1 and a predicted frame at the first frame of scene 2. So now what's going to happen is that the P frame in scene 2 will use the previous P frame as a temporal reference. However, there is not much redundancy between the P frame from scene 2 and the P frame from scene 1. So here we're going to have a very, very bad, suboptimal temporal prediction process. So in practice, what's going to happen is that this very P frame will actually grow in size and will behave like an intra-coded frame while being flagged as predicted. And in video coding, it's not very efficient. So the best thing we can do here is to actually place an intra-coded frame here. So instead of having a P frame at the scene change, now we can place an intra-coded frame. And of course, all the while, closing the GOP with a P frame, since we don't need to have an open GOP on scene 1. So let's summarize. Fixed GOP. Fixed GOP is a fixed time between two iframes. So 10 frame GOP, 10 frames per second, it's 1 second. So we're going to have a 1 second GOP. It leads to poor coding efficiency at scene changes, for the reason I explained. If you don't place iframe at the most optimal places, like as scene changes, you're going to try to do temporal prediction where there is no correlation between frames. And then the variable GOP. The variable GOP allows the encoders to place iframes during scene changes. And this will lead to a much better video quality because now the encoder can place iframe at the most optimal places. Of course, don't be fooled by the GOP size parameter inside Titan Live, because as soon as you tick the variable GOP, also called dynamic GOP or flexible GOP, you're gonna actually set the max GOP size. That means the encoder will be able to place the iframe within the range that you set. For example, 25 frames or 1 second. This would become the max GOP size since the GOP is now variable.